one of the things our dad taught us from when we were very young was it's important to hear the other side. And our dad was this high-powered attorney, but he said, listen, you got to understand the other side as well as you understand your own side. And I think that's one of the things as I watched my brother Michael in action. He cares and he listens, and even if he thinks he has the right answer, he's always open to listening to somebody else. He's always been that way. Our dad taught us that. I think that's one of the things Rex Lee would be most proud about Michael Lee, the man and the senator.
And because he's the son that's doing the job, I think in the way our dad would have wanted him to do.
Yeah.
He's doing it in a way that's committed to the document that our dad spent his career advancing and cementing. I would say this, Mike Lee would be my favorite senator if he weren't my brother. There is not anybody who I respect more in terms of the way he approaches the job of the United States Senate, the way he treats his colleagues, the way he treats all of the people that he works with. The fact that he's also my brother just gives me such pride and joy and love for him.
My late father, he died 26 years ago. He taught me to love the Constitution and taught me the basics of it from the time I was very young. He taught me to revere it.
I have a promise that I'm committed to keep. It's a constitutional promise. It's one that recognizes that a smaller government is a greater America. That's what was promised to you by the founders. We honor the Constitution of the United States of America.
Mike Lee for Senate.
I'm Mike Lee, and I approve this message.
He goes out of his way to help people. I've had sons, nephews, former students of mine always come back to me and, your brother has been such a big help to me and such a big support to me. And he's done that for all of us, and it's been really fun to see him do that for so many other people.
It doesn't matter where Michael is. It doesn't matter the company he's in, who he's with. He's the same, always. He's a man of integrity. He's not going to change his core beliefs. That's just not who he is.
I know people know Michael politically, and they know his views and how hard he works. I wish everybody could know his heart. He has the best heart of anybody I know. He's the kindest person of anybody I know.
And that consistency of character has been with him forever, since childhood. So I wouldn't expect him to change just because he's in Washington. There is a consistency of character, of being able to remember what he believes in and stand for what he believes in.
In the halls of Congress, few have the courage to stand up and say no more. To runaway spending, to big government, to the assault on our Constitution. In Washington, Mike Lee often stands alone, because he's standing with us back home.
When government threatens your freedoms, I fight back, every time. I'm Mike Lee, and I approve this message, because standing with you is what I've always done, and always will do.
Standing for us, our Senator, Mike Lee.
Welcome, and thank you for tuning into this series of conversations about issues affecting our livelihoods, our homes, and our families. Today, we're discussing inflation. Too many dollars chasing too few goods, thanks to government spending. Gas prices have been rising dramatically since President Biden took office. The day he was sworn in, gas in the United States was averaging $2.39 per gallon. Today, we're paying far more than that, thanks to the inflation that Democrat policies have inflicted on us. Filling a cart with groceries to feed a family is getting harder and harder. It's no longer a question of deciding which luxury items to forego. Parents and families are now having to decide which basic staples they're going to live without. These catastrophic Biden policies aren't limited to just when it's time to fill the gas tank or the grocery cart. It's now harder than ever for families even to secure housing. What was once an integral part of the American dream is now more of a pipe dream. There are effective conservative policies ready to be implemented to combat these punishing liberal problems. Election day is not that far away. If we're going to win the war on inflation and make life affordable again, we must retake the Senate and the House. We have a good shot at doing so, but casting conservative votes is the key. In Utah, we're bearing more than our fair share of the burden of inflation. I'm the ranking member of the Joint Economic Committee. My team of economists track the impact of inflation on various states. We see the rising costs of gas, groceries, and housing across the nation. Do you know what else we see? We see that in Utah, families are being hit the hardest, harder than pretty much anywhere else. Thanks to Democrat policies in the Biden administration, life in Utah for the average Utah family is costing an extra $925 per month, every single month, as compared to the day Joe Biden took office. That is completely unacceptable. And by the way, we track that data with respect to every state in the union. And there's no state that's been hit harder than Utah. Joining me tonight to discuss exactly what President Biden's inflation looks like in Utah and what Republicans can do to stop it is Utah Governor Spencer Cox. Governor Cox, thank you so much for your support and welcome to this conversation. Governor, tell me what are you hearing from constituents throughout the state of Utah, and what do you tell them when it comes to issues they're facing regarding inflation?
Well, Senator, I'm hearing the same thing I know that you're hearing, and that is people are incredibly frustrated with what they're seeing. Of course, as they see inflation going up and understand that wages are not keeping pace with that severe inflation, well north of 10% here in Utah, some of the highest, unfortunately, in the country. They're very angry, they're upset, and they're struggling. For many of us, we're fortunate that we don't have to count pennies anymore. But I remember going to the grocery store with my wife as a young married couple and taking a calculator with us every time we went to the grocery store. And that's the case for far too many Utahns. And so as those prices go up, there are real impacts. If you have to choose between groceries and gasoline, that's a real choice that has negative impacts. And so there's certainly a tremendous amount of frustration on the ground here in Utah.
Yeah, there certainly is. And when you measure that inflation that we're experiencing in Utah relative to the day President Biden took office, it's over 15%. And that's just stunning what we're seeing. So, Governor, when you take stock of the inflation hardships that Utahns seem to be facing, how easy is it for us to walk away from that versus how easy is it for us to see the connection between the Democratic leadership in Washington and the cause of the inflation?
Sure. Look, I understand that there are multiple causes to the inflation, and some of them, of course, the war in Russia and Ukraine has a role to play in that. But we know this is quantifiable. In fact, even Democratic economists have verified this. I mean, even the Fed has verified that policy choices and decisions made by this administration have significantly increased inflation in the United States and right here in Utah. There's a direct line. I mean, the president himself talked about how it was important to raise the cost of energy so that we could get away from fossil fuels. That's a terrible policy, especially at a time when there is a war happening in Ukraine and Russia, when so much of the world is dependent on a terrible dictator like Putin for their oil and gas. When we know as a country we have the ability not just to be self-sufficient, but to be a net exporter of energy to the world. And it's the people at the margins that get hurt the most by these decisions. And it's not just that. It's of course the reckless spending. We know as we're coming out of a pandemic, there's always going to be an increase in demand before supply catches up. But what has happened, there's been fuel poured on this fire by this administration with so many different policy choices, bills that they've passed that have increased the budget spending and have just poured fuel on this raging fire. And so, it's not partisan to say that this administration has significantly impacted the rate of inflation. That has been quantified, it has been verified, and it is a fact that the Democrats are making things far worse than they need to be. And by the way, when called on this, we hear things like, "Oh, it's really not that bad," or "Everyone should just buy an electric vehicle." There's a disconnect happening between Washington, D.C. and real people here on the ground and the struggles that they're facing. And so it's been deeply disappointing. And again, I know you get to see it firsthand almost every day.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And you're also correct to point out it's not partisan to observe that it's their policies. It's their policies that have done it. The problem is that all Democrats have supported the president in those policies, at least the Democrats who serve in Washington, D.C. Now,
and by the way, again, it's by design. I mean,
right.
this is really simple stuff. It's Econ 101. It's just supply and demand, and we've been warning about this for years and years and years, and now we're seeing it play out right in front of us.
Indeed. One of the more common comments that I hear from Utahns as it relates to inflation sometimes relates to housing. There aren't that many single-family homes for sale, and those that are for sale are often way too expensive. There are a lot of people who fear home ownership is just no longer part of the American dream. And now I don't agree with that. I think there are ways to make sure that Utahns can feel the pride and security of home ownership. I've got proposals before Congress right now to address that specific issue. One of them is called the Houses Act. Basically, it would make certain portions of Bureau of Land Management managed land available for the building of more homes, more single-family homes. Governor, from your own position, how hard has inflation hit those specifically looking to own their own home for the first time?
Well, it's really interesting, Senator. This is one area where Utah is not proud to be a leader in the nation in the rising cost of homes here in Utah, not just along the Wasatch Front, but really all across the state. The silver lining of good news is that because we had the right policies during COVID, and Utah has been recognized as the best state to combat COVID and to improve the economy. We were the best state to get kids back in school. What that did was it attracted people from all over the country who were leaving blue states where there were terrible policies around COVID, and they're coming where we had a strong economy, where schools were open, where people could work, and they came here. So that has significantly increased the demand for housing, and we're the fastest growing state anyway. We have the highest birth rates over the last 10 years, and it's just a wonderful place to live. And so our housing has not kept up with that. And that's one area where we can, as a state, really make a difference, unlike some of the others, like energy and the reckless spending in Washington, D.C. And so this is something we're committed to. We're working closely with the legislature to increase the supply, to lower the barriers to get into home ownership. I'm with you. I absolutely believe that we need to keep the American dream alive. And part of that American dream is home ownership. And we're going to do everything possible to make that dream stay alive here in Utah. But you mentioned something so very important, and I appreciate that. And I love your leadership on the Houses Act, because we fight about public lands here in the state of Utah. We just filed a lawsuit a few weeks ago challenging the president's decision with the signing of a pen, his ability to make these giant national parks. But people often think that federal land ownership, almost 2/3 of Utah is owned by the federal government, is all outside in our national parks and these other areas. And that's not true. There are parts inside of our city limits or just outside our city limits where the federal government does own property. And what you're doing is something that needs to happen not just here, but again across the country, because this is a problem being faced everywhere in every single state right now. The increased cost of building and of homes, and so I think it's brilliant. We're here to support you any way we can to make sure that we have the opportunity to use that federal land to build homes, and that's going to decrease. Again, it's simple supply and demand. As we increase the supply, the price will go down.
Oh, thank you. That's a great answer, and I really appreciate your insights. Our time together on this program tonight has come to an end. Governor, I'm so grateful to you for your support and for your friendship. We've covered a lot of ground in these few minutes, but there's always more we could discuss, and really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, Senator. I just want to say I too appreciate your friendship. I'm grateful for your leadership in these difficult times, and I look forward to working closely with you as we work on these issues together.
Thank you so much. Now, if you have any questions about any of the inflation topics that we've covered tonight, or if you'd like to send questions or comments or ideas, please visit my campaign website at leeforsenate.com.
I'm Commissioner Mark Whitney, Beaver County.
Tracy Glover, I'm the Kane County Sheriff.
Leland F. Pollock, Garfield County Commissioner.
My name is Bruce Adams. I'm a San Juan County Commissioner.
My name is Tammy Pearson. I'm a Commissioner in Beaver County.
I think Senator Lee understands the needs of public land counties, small counties.
His vast legal knowledge of Western issues and public lands issues is what draws me to endorse and support him.
Federal public land in Garfield County makes up 93% of my county, and it can be a nightmare if we don't have representation in Washington, D.C. and someone fighting the good battle for us. And Mike Lee has always been there.
He has been a champion, especially for rural Utah and Utah as a whole, on representing our values and representing the Constitution.
He's a fighter. He's the conservative voice for us in D.C. in the Senate, and he's done a remarkable job.
Mike Lee is our guidepost to the Constitution. As you know, he clerked at the United States Supreme Court, and he continues to be a daily student of the United States Constitution. People will actually approach Mike Lee on the floor of the Senate to ask him his opinion about what the Constitution would direct us to do with regard to constitutional rights of all kinds.
My name is Eliza. I am Mike Lee's youngest child. I'm the only daughter, so I'm the obvious favorite child, and I wholeheartedly endorse him. He is the most wonderful person, and I know he's a wonderful senator because he is an incredible dad.
I'm so honored to be joined by my friend Ronna McDaniel. Ronna has served as the chair of the Republican National Committee since 2017. Under her leadership, the RNC has raised record funds and made its largest ever ground game investments. Ronna previously served as the chair of the Michigan Republican Party, and she's a hero, she's an icon, she's a bastion for the conservative movement. Ronna, welcome to the conversation, and thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for that great introduction. I'm so happy to be with you, and thanks for all that you do for our country and the Senate and serving the great state of Utah.
Thank you. It's an important time to be serving because there's a lot that people are dealing with all over the country. Inflation is crippling American families. It's hitting them especially hard in Utah. How important is it, in your opinion, Ronna, for Republicans to win back control of Congress? How important is that specifically to the objective of getting inflation under control?
Mike, I say this all the time, that inflation didn't just happen. It is a direct result of policies being put forward by Democrats, policies like getting rid of our energy independence and overstimulating the economy and paying people to stay out of the workplace so that employers had to pay people so much more to work. And then they pass those increases onto the customer. I know it. We feel it. I have a daughter in school in Utah. She's calling me all the time about gas prices and Mom, it's so hard. And we feel it every day as parents, every time I go to the grocery store with eggs and milk. And not just that, insurance prices are rising, rent prices are rising. I know there's a housing issue. My daughter's friend at Utah State didn't even have an apartment when she started school this year because there's such a housing crunch. So the fact that you're the senator from Utah and you understand these problems is so instrumental in why we need common sense, conservative fiscal policy in Washington. I just want to remind people that the person you're running against still has a $700,000 debt for his failed presidential run. And I just don't think that's the type of leadership that's going to help solve the inflation crisis in this country.
Yeah. Of course, the Democrats like him, and that's why they've endorsed him and why they're supporting him from all over the country. And that's also why we're going to beat him. You know, the Democrats make a lot of mistakes, and they're making all of this worse. They of course, recently passed their bill, this ironically named Inflation Reduction Act. And, you know, they did this without a single Republican vote and without a hint of an acknowledgement on their part of how ironic and deeply disturbing it was that they were enacting a piece of legislation that spends $750 billion that we don't have and calling it the Inflation Reduction Act. Meanwhile, my colleague Bernie Sanders, you know, the most liberal among ultra-liberal Democrats, he acknowledged that the bill itself would do basically nothing to reduce inflation. Now, look, we never experienced inflation, anything like this, under the Trump-Pence administration. So how exactly do you think Americans will benefit now by electing a Republican majority in November?
In so many ways. And again, I go back to the Democrats control everything, the White House, the Senate, the House. And I think your opponent would have absolutely been part of this bill and would have supported the Democrats because he's their nominee in Utah. He's going to pretend that he's not, but he's their nominee. I call him Evan Dim Mullen. But the reality is, Republicans, when we take back the Senate, we are going to restore common sense fiscal policy. And you know, you can tell what a party stands for by their priorities. And we're seeing the Democrat priorities through their legislation. So no, this didn't reduce inflation. But what it did do is say, we're going to fund 87,000 IRS agents. We're going to pay off student loans for people who've already graduated from college. Instead of saying, how do we fix our crime crisis across this country? How do we figure out the drug crisis that's coming, that's impacting our kids? How do we solve the problems for kids who are having deficits? We know 9-year-olds are now reading and doing math at a 30-year low coming out of the pandemic. So they didn't fund ways to help parents whose kids are suffering. They didn't fund more police. Instead, they put money into more government control. So Republicans will change that. And we will, because we're running on it. We're running on common sense solutions. And we're going to make sure that we're actually putting the American people first instead of our party first. And right now, the Democrats are only concerned about power in their party. And I guarantee you, your opponent would have been a vote for this insane act that has just wreaked more damage on average, hardworking Americans.
Yeah, no, I'm quite confident you're right on that, and almost everything else is for that matter. But you're almost certainly right in concluding that he would have voted for it. I asked him on social media whether he would have supported it, and all he would say was that he would that he likes parts of it, and that he would work if he were in office to get the best deal possible. Now, every Republican, literally every Republican, the most moderate, middle-of-the-road Republican in the United States Senate was strongly against this. The fact that he wouldn't acknowledge the need to vote against it, and the fact that all he did say about it was praise, the specific provisions were just praise, tells us everything we know, everything we need to know about the fact that he would have voted for it. Now, Ronna, you and I share the same faith. And yes, something that's important to me that I know is also really important to you is the need to protect religious liberty. What do you think's at stake for religious freedom in America that's relevant to this midterm election?
Mike, we've talked about this before. First of all, it's so fun to talk to you. We've become very good friends since I've been in DC. You were my class president when I was at BYU. I never thought I'd meet you as a senator. My daughter's now at BYU, and you've been such a help for me as we've had family away from Michigan, where I live, and my son just got accepted to Utah State. So you're not just a man of faith, you're a man who exemplifies faith, because you've always been there to serve me and my family. When we have our daughter far away, you've reached out, said if she needs dinner. So let me share that. That's one of the things I love about you. That goes way beyond being a senator. You're just a good person. But faith is at stake. And when you look at the Democrat Party right now, they don't uphold faith, whether it's any religion, from the Jewish faith to Catholicism to our faith. It's deeply, deeply concerning. And I think that if people don't realize that that's at stake, and I know sometimes it's uncomfortable to talk about politics and you don't want to get in the fray because it's so vitriolic. But when you know that your faith is under attack, and when you know that we stand for things that are so good, it's hard to sit back and act like it's just going to be okay. Because trust me, there is no reverence for faith coming from the Democrat Party right now. And in fact, I think they're moving towards removing tax exemption if we don't abide by their view of America and the view of what we should be as a religion. And they're going to do that across the board. So it's absolutely on the ballot this fall.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that about the tax-exempt status of religious institutions. It really is troubling. We've seen this coming for years, but we've seen it coming from Democrats in Congress, in both houses of Congress and in the White House. Aggressive moves that, unless stopped, will culminate in threatening to remove and ultimately removing the tax-exempt status from religious institutions that happen to harbor unfavorable or unpopular religious views. Now, the First Amendment is supposed to protect us against that. The fact that we're even faced with this prospect is very uncomfortable, and all the more reason why we need legislation affirmatively prohibiting the denial of tax-exempt status for religious institutions along the lines of what is being threatened. You know, our border with Mexico is also something that troubles me. It's we've got a crisis that is unparalleled in modern history. I don't think we've ever seen that in our entire history as a country. The crisis along the southern border is just absolutely insane right now. Now, under Republican leadership, we made some amazing strides towards actually securing our border. In fact, we achieved a degree of border security that I'm not sure we had seen in decades. How, in your view, has the Biden administration unraveled those gains?
Well, in so many ways, Mike. And you know, you and I know we love immigration. We love people who come to our country legally. Many of us come from families that did that, right? But this open border policy isn't humane for the people making this dangerous crossing, who are having to pay coyotes, whose children are being trafficked, and they're being put in harm's way. And it's certainly not good for the communities that are being inundated. And what Trump did, and this is just a policy that he created called Remain in Mexico. He said, if you're seeking asylum in the United States of America, while we're adjudicating your case, you're going to remain in Mexico. What Biden has said is, no, you're going to come into the country. We will just release you, and we'll hope you show up for your court date. And many of these families get lost, and many of the children are getting lost and trafficked. And the news media is ignoring some just truly horrific stories about what's happening in our border. But I'll just give you one statistic, which is just alarming to me, on the fentanyl crisis. China is pumping fentanyl through Mexico. Mexico cartels are bringing it in through our southern border. Just in August, just last month, 2,000 pounds of fentanyl was seized, enough to kill 500 million Americans. And as we're approaching Halloween, they have created this rainbow candy-colored fentanyl to look like candy. And even Chuck Schumer, so this is bipartisan, just did a press conference on this last weekend, showing Sweethearts candy and this fentanyl and how similar they look. They literally are poisoning our children, and they're bringing this across our southern border. And this is fixable. And you know how we know it? Because we did it. And so again, you're running against somebody who is in lockstep with the Democrat agenda. And I just don't know how it's humane or even good for anybody that we have this open border, and it's bringing crime and other things. And it's not good for people who are coming here, who want to come here legally, because we should have a pathway for legal citizenship. We love that. My sister-in-law is from Colombia. She's a legal citizen. The RNC is now doing citizen initiatives where we actually tutoring people who have qualified for citizenship, and we're helping them pass their citizenship test. We love those stories. That's the greatness of America. But coming in through the darkness of night and having to hide is no way to live. And having to pay people to smuggle you across our southern border is no way to survive. And that's what the Democrat Party is promoting right now.
That's right. And they're promoting in the name of compassion, under the guise of compassion, something that is not compassionate. It's oppressive. I spent 2 years of my life on our southern border with Mexico in the southern Rio Grande Valley of Texas, in neighborhoods where nobody spoke English. They were inhabited almost entirely by recent immigrants. And what I've found there is that, contrary to what a lot of people think they know about the border and about recent immigrants, there's no group of people in America, I believe, that are more fearful of uncontrolled waves of illegal immigration than recent immigrants themselves, particularly those living on or near a border. It's their jobs, it's their neighborhoods, it's their children's schools, it's their families that are threatened by uncontrolled waves of illegal immigration. And so what the Democrats are doing is really good for the drug cartels, who make billions off of this human trafficking operation they have. But it's really bad for recent immigrants in America. It's really bad for those coming up through the caravans. Most of the girls and the women are subjected to sexual assault. Many of them become subjected to the human sex trafficking along the way. This is a horrible, oppressive practice. And as you point out, it's also the caravan system that's bringing in all this fentanyl that has the ability to kill so many Americans. It's absolutely frightening. They've weaponized fentanyl.
And I would just add it really quick is two of our congressional candidates in Texas right now, Monica De La Cruz and Mayra Flores. Mayra Flores, who's the first Mexican-American woman to serve in Congress, who's a Republican. They serve on the border, the Rio Grande Valley. Their husbands are Border Patrol agents. And if you talk to them, they will share their stories of how inhumane this is. And I hope people go look up what's happening and the kids that are dying. There's a nurse who was just putting out that of the 11 fatalities they had in their ER, 6 of them were kids under 15 dying from this fentanyl. We are killing our children. And there's a silence coming from the Democrat Party. I certainly don't hear your opponent talking about it.
No.
Every mom in America right now is afraid. Every time my son goes to a party or a football game right now, I'm talking to him about, hey, don't touch anything. Don't look at a pill, or don't, it's so frightening. And we have a government that can stop it, and they're choosing not to. And that's what's even more upsetting.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you're also right that the Democrats aren't talking about it. You're also right that my opponent isn't talking about it. In fact, my opponent, after criticizing everything Republicans do, everything Donald Trump ever did, also claims that he doesn't intend that he absolutely will not caucus with Republicans. And then, as people have asked him about it, he said, well, I don't really intend to caucus with either party. I don't really buy that, because you can't get committee assignments without caucusing. Nobody doesn't caucus. Anyone who does try it ends up becoming a de facto member of the Democratic caucus. And that is especially true in his case, where he is the Democratic candidate in this race, having been endorsed by the Democratic Party. He's raised money through the Democrats. He voted for Joe Biden. He encouraged other people to vote for Joe Biden. But tell me, how would an independent who has acknowledged up front that he absolutely will not caucus with Republicans, how will that person interact in Congress? And if, in theory, he did refuse to caucus with either party, how might that affect the direction of our country?
First of all, you'd be totally ineffective if you're not caucusing. And like you mentioned, Mike, you're not going to be on a committee assignment. So what he's doing is he's lying. And I'll just say it. And I'm a nice, mom from Michigan, but he's lying. He's saying this so he can get votes from both sides in Utah. And he's trying to act like everything to everybody. But you know what? If you don't stand for something, you don't stand for anything. And he's not calling out the drug crisis. He's not calling out the border. He didn't call out the Biden Inflation Act. He's silent because he's the Democrat nominee and he's not going to criticize his party. So we all know where he's going to be. He will be a +1 for the Democrat Party. And by the way, if he wins, it's a -1 for Republicans. And Chuck Schumer controls the reins of the Senate for another 2 years. And look how good they've done. Look how good they've done. Gas is more, groceries are more, crime is surging, our border's out of control, drugs are coming to our country. Are we a more united country? No. They've done nothing to bring bipartisanship. So give me a break. He's just not telling the truth. And he's pretending, and I think that's really dishonest. At least stand up and say who you are.
Right.
But he's trying to get votes from both sides, and that's his plan. That's his game plan. And I hope the people of Utah see through it. I'm thinking about having my daughter change her voter registration. I don't know if it's too late from Michigan to Utah because she's a Michigan resident, but it is just really, really shameful. And Mike, you are the best thing. You understand the Constitution. You understand the freedoms. You understand the greatness of this country. You are a true intellect in the Senate, and you study everything, and you're thoughtful and deliberate about everything, and your colleagues like you. I've spent a lot of time with you. You are the absolute right person for Utah, but you are also the key to Republicans winning back the Senate because we're 1 seat away. And that's how we'll restore some common sense and sanity to Washington, but we have to retain your seat. It's even shameful that we even have to talk about that right now because this person's charading. But don't fall for it. Don't fall for it, people.
Well, thank you. That's so nice of you to say that. It is important to focus on these things, though, isn't it, as we approach the November 8th election. What would you say to voters out there? Voters out there who aren't sure whether they're going to vote. How important is it for Republicans to show up and actually cast their votes? And even if they're not Republicans, how is it for people how important is it for those who are dissatisfied with the direction of our country and the direction that the radical Democratic agenda is taking it? What could you say to encourage them to show up and cast votes for Republican candidates in November?
You know, I hope everyone gets out and votes. This is such a critical election. You know, it's interesting that Democrats hold the reins of power in Washington with the Senate, the House, and the White House. And they're not running on their record. They're not running on, well, we've restored jobs, or we've, brought down gas prices, or we have a more united country, or our streets are safer. They're not running on a record of accomplishment because what they have done is actually made our country less safe, less prosperous, less united. Republicans are putting forward a plan to make sure that we restore jobs, that we restore economic sense, that we have parental rights in our kids' education, that we secure our border. We have all these plans that we're putting forward. And you want to know how you know we're doing it? Look at our Republican governors. The states that are doing the best in job recovery and economically and kids' schools are all led by Republican governors across this country right now. So you can see our policies at work and in action. And then you can look at what the Democrats have done as they've held the reins of power. They're not running on their record. So they're going to try and distract and talk about anything other than what they've not been able to do the last 2 years as they've held everything. So you've got to get out and vote. Get your family members to vote. Get your friends to vote. Don't assume they're voting. I know I go to church on Sunday and people the Sunday before the election are asking me who to vote for. So start studying up and make sure you vote for Mike Lee. Number one, make sure you vote for Mike Lee. And he is absolutely such a great senator. He represents Utah so well. And he's going to tell you where he stands. He's not going to, wishy-wash and pretend to be something he's not to get your vote. You're going to know where he stands. And that's called integrity. And that's what Mike Lee has.
Wow. Ronna, you're amazing. I really appreciate your wise and very kind words. And we're doing everything we can to get out the vote in Utah on October 15th. If you happen to be in Utah then or can be there, we'd love to have you. We're going to have gatherings all over the state to try to get people out in every county and get them excited, get them knocking on doors, and we're going to be encouraging every Republican throughout the state to get their friends and neighbors out to vote and to vote for Republican candidates. Ronna, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. It's really an honor, and it was a pleasure to hear your perspective on the issues that we're facing as a nation. I really look forward to continue to work with you and ensuring that we elect Republican majorities in Congress, and we begin to steer our nation back to the policies that made our country strong and secure and prosperous during the Trump-Pence administration. Thanks so much, Ronna.
Thanks for having me.
You know, it is such an honor to serve with Senator Lee, a man of such character and credibility. He's absolutely brilliant, and he works so hard. He really works hard for the people of Utah. And he's just such a scholar, such a gentleman, and is so well respected by the entire body.
I'm a great fan and friend of Mike Lee, and the country is fortunate to have him as a United States Senator. When I need to have a conversation with somebody who is smart, who is principled, who's got experience, who will make a decision based upon what the law, the Constitution says, that person I want to talk to is Mike Lee. That the country has a better Senate as a result of his presence here.
Well, Senator Mike Lee is one of the true thinkers in the U.S. Senate, and he's somebody that he never has wavered. He has the subject matter down pat.
Mike is a constitutional conservative that is a voice of reason and clarity on the floor of the United States Senate. It's my great honor to support him. I look forward to serving with him for 6 more years.
I'm John Bozeman from Arkansas. I very much appreciate working with Senator Lee. Nobody does a better job expressing the conservative values that we all believe in.
One of my stalwart companions, true conservative principles, especially when it comes to budget integrity and all the things that I believe in, like freedom, liberty, and skin in the game. Being a scrappy entrepreneur from Indiana, you know, he and I and a few others are sometimes the only ones side by side on those core issues.
Welcome to the conversation. We're discussing inflation, and I'm happy to be joined by Representative John Curtis. John has represented Utah's 3rd congressional district since 2017. Before coming to Congress, he served as the beloved mayor for the city of Provo from 2010 to 2017. Congressman, thanks so much for your support, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Senator, I'm just delighted to be with you and delighted to support you.
You spend a lot of time in Utah, as do I. Sometimes we even get to spend time together on the airplane. As you travel the state and as you hear from constituents in your district, I would imagine that you're hearing about inflation from time to time. Is that right?
If I can quote you, there's 3 issues in Washington: inflation, inflation, and inflation.
Right.
And it's what's on everybody's mind. It's killing them.
And those are big issues because everybody's feeling it, and they're feeling it like they've never felt it before. I mean, we haven't seen this in many decades. Most people alive today have never experienced inflation like this.
So some of us remember the 80s, and it was not a good time. And it feels like we're headed on that same trajectory.
Right. People are finding it difficult to obtain their basic monthly necessities. Sadly, so much of this is the predictable, foreseeable, and in fact foreseen result of things that Democrats do and have done under Joe Biden's leadership to spend money that we don't have. For example, the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed just a month and a half.
You can actually say that with a straight face.
Yeah, it's hard to say it. It's such deep, sick irony that they called it that, isn't it?
It is. You know, when I was in college, they taught me in Economics 101, inflation happens when there's too much money chasing too few goods.
Yep.
And Washington's blowing it on both sides of that equation.
Right. In fact, that's the only thing it comes from. Milton Friedman said in the United States of America, anytime there's inflation, it's because too much money is being spent in Washington. That's it. It's no mystery. And so these guys just churned out an additional $750 billion in one fell swoop, in one bill that they misnamed, that was supported by, at least in the Senate, it was supported by every Democrat and not a single Republican.
Same in the House. Yeah. We didn't give them a single vote, and they got it through. They only, in the House, their margin is about four votes, and they didn't need us. They got it through. And that was, of course, on the heels of almost $500 billion in forgiving student debt. And sometimes people don't look at that the same as government spending, but that's putting $500 billion into the economy that should otherwise not be there.
That's right. And when that exceeds the amount of money that we have coming into the government, we're just printing it. It makes everybody's money buy less.
Yeah, and on the other side, on the supply side, we're over-regulating. right? If we wanted to get the supply side moving, that's the other half of the equation, we need to get businesses rolling. And you can't do that when you're overregulating.
You're exactly right. Failed regulatory policy has made inflation worse during this administration. We've seen that with energy prices, and energy prices go up. They in turn affect the price of everything else. We've also seen it with shortages that have come about because of bad regulatory policy. This year, we've seen baby formula, something that's in high demand throughout your district.
Who would have ever thought that we would be having that discussion in a conversation like this?
Exactly. And you notice they didn't have a baby formula shortage in Mexico or in Canada or in Australia or New Zealand or in any country in Europe. It was just here because it was an artificial shortage. It was a shortage brought about by bad regulatory policy. It was a significant enough problem for us that I introduced a bill called the Formula Act that passed, was signed by the president, and has eased the burden. What does that say? How sad is that we had to enact a law so that we could actually have baby formula caused by a problem of gross regulatory mismanagement?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that act. And I say thank you as representing the hospital with the largest per capita birth rate in the United States. It's no surprise to all of us in Utah that there are a lot of babies, and many, many people were very concerned about this formula, including my kids. So we were expecting our 15th grandchild. And it was a serious, it's fun, but it's a serious topic of conversation at the Curtis home.
We're expecting our first in January. We can't wait. John, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate your friendship and your support, and I appreciate your willingness to talk to the people of Utah in this conversation about inflation.
I hope we can do it again. Thanks, Senator.
Thank you.
Ever since he's been in office, I felt like he's pretty accurately represented the majority of Utah, and so it's really refreshing to have somebody in the Senate who actually cares about their constituents and doesn't just go with the flow.
I've also got a number of reforms related to personal privacy, making sure the government can't spy on you. Domestic surveillance by the U.S. government is problematic. I've got a couple of pieces of legislation that I'm working on that limit federal government's authority on the Patriot Act, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and other authorities to surveil you.
I like Mike Lee because he's straight to the point, he's honest, he stands for the Constitution. I'm a veteran. I flew Apache helicopters in 2 tours. I can appreciate people that say it like it is.
We need to elect more Republicans who are willing to get criticized and willing to vote no. With Democrats, they really want Armageddon to come so they can resort to socialism.
I support Mike Lee 100%. Mike has been someone who you can truly, you can count on, right? So he's a man of principle. His votes always uphold what he says. He's a man of action, honesty, and integrity. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the fact that he has always been a very conservative Republican, no matter what. He's always stood for principle. He always fought for individual rights, and he believes in the Constitution, and that is very, very important to me. So I support Mike.
It's unconstitutional and unlawful for about 12 different reasons.
And I like him because he's very transparent. I have loved that he's been open on Facebook about his actions, why he's taken them. I love that he is a true Republican.
He has no fear. He is very articulate, and when he speaks, he's very open to where you can communicate with him and ask him questions, find out why did you do this, what's going on, and when he talks to you, you can see everything that he's done is logical. It is right down the Republican way, and being able to protect the American people and what they are standing for, to be able to have their freedom, to be able to have their constitutional rights protected.